If you're just joining us, Professor Wolff is a Marxian economist well known for his work on economic methodology at class analysis. He hosts what I'm sure you should be watching every moment that it comes out, the second that it comes out, Economic Update. Again, on the internet and all over the place, we're reading about extreme conditions. There are people preparing for global food shortages by I don't want to call it hoarding. Some people call it hoarding. Some people call it prepping. Some people call it just saving a few things just in case so they don't starve to death. And the internet is encouraging people to look into the future and realize that everything they've come to depend on, including the way food is delivered to them, the way it gets from the farm to their table, is now being called into question. And as China faces its first corn shortfall in years, food prices are rising around the world. People are asking, is food insecurity the latest of the 2020 plagues? What are your thoughts on what is happening in China and food insecurity?
Okay, the first question is there's, of course, a rational basis here. People are quite right. The world is falling apart. All the ways that people say that to one another and feel it and see it, they have a grain of truth. That wouldn't be happening if there weren't something going on. I think what's going on is the collapse of an economic system, of capitalism. Let's remember, every economic system in the history of the world has the following pattern. It's born, it evolves and changes over time, and then it dies. Just like you and me. We're born, we evolve over our lives, and then we pass away. Economic systems are exactly the same. Capitalism is no different. Capitalism, we know, was born 17th century in England. It's spread all over the world. It has evolved over time, which means its next stage is passing away. It's not a question of whether, it's really only a question of when and how. I think that's what's going
eating
on.
Eating itself, that's how.
Right. That's part of it. That's exactly part of it. That was true of all the other economic systems. Their own internal contradictions and problems in the end consume them. Just like the processes of our own bodies will in the end make us pass on, like in any case. So people are worried and they're looking around and they're frightened, and they should be. That's rational, that's reasonable. It's when it comes to the diagnosis as to what's wrong that we get a little strange. So far, the chain of food production and food delivery has worked reasonably well. Given the failures everywhere else, it could have been much worse. Is that a guarantee that it won't get worse? No. Is it possible that it could become an interrupted food system? The answer is yes, because not only do you have the pandemic doing all kinds of damage to the people, to the farms, to the shipping mechanisms, but you have the political fallout of a dying system. And let me give you some examples. The trade war and the tariff war imposed by Mr. Trump, desperate to slow the decline in America by finding a scapegoat in China and acting out to disrupt all of the relationships that have been built up over the years between the United States and China, which include financing and shipping food. I mean, this is very important. Now, this morning's Financial Times carries a story that the American companies in China are completely disregarding Mr. Trump, are closely working with the Chinese. It's a wonderful story about the difference between blubbering in Washington and the reality on the ground. But I don't want to assure anyone of something I can't assure you of. I will tell you this, that the single most important reason that the Communist Party of China became the government, won the civil war in China in 1949, was because of the skill that that party showed in dealing with the food problems of China. It's literally built in to the DNA of that political communist party, because China had always produced enough food. The problem in China over decades, over centuries, was not producing food, but getting food from the place where it was produced to the place where people needed to eat it. The transportation system, broadly the economic system, was what wasn't working. And the Chinese Communist Party said that, organized in those parts of the country the kinds of distribution system that would mean that where food was grown, it could be gotten to the people who need it. My guess is the minute they show up with shortages, their history will make them kick into gear really quickly, because that's how they became the people in charge in that country. And my guess is they're not going to let that problem undo them. They're attuned to that more than you would see in most other countries.
I've noticed some of the reading I was doing was about how China is going into they're buying more corn, for example, from the United States than they ever have, possibly, to mitigate against their own loss of crops due to climate change, and also due to circumstances surrounding the coronavirus, whether they be delivery or inability to work or inability to tend or any of that stuff. Are we going to be seeing that here?
Yeah, I think if I could add to your point, there's also a political motive, and there's no reason to not put it on the table. The Chinese reacted to the tariffs imposed on them by President Trump, among other ways, by stopping the buying of soybeans. They wanted to underscore that if the United States is going to initiate a trade war against China, then China will have no choice but to retaliate. Tit for tat, the usual kind of games that politicians play. So they stopped buying soybeans, which had a very serious effect on the soybean market, particularly here in the United States. They bought soybeans, for example, from Brazil, creating a very close relationship between China and Brazil as they depend on each other in the way that used to describe the US and China. I think the Chinese now are buying corn in part to drive home that point. If the Chinese buy American corn, it is the best news corn farmers could imagine, since the Chinese are the biggest country on earth, the biggest importer of food on earth, and it tells you that the corn producers have a future if we have good relations with China, versus the soybean farmers who discovered we will not have a good future for them because of the political games Mr. Trump feels the need to play in the process of scapegoating China. Those are the realities. What happens now? Well, look, that depends a lot on the political decisions made in China on the one hand, but in the United States in the upcoming election and so on. If the response of the United States continues to be what it has been, it's a kind of go it alone. We don't need the rest of the world. We will punish you if you don't do what we want. We will cut off our relationships. It's kind of America alone. And let me tell you, with a declining economy and a world in which other parts of the world are not declining, they have their problems. But capitalism is on the ascendancy in terms of output, of growth, in places like China and India and Brazil. And the United States going it alone, that was not smart back in the last century as a strategy, which is why we abandoned it. But to go backwards now and to try it now at a time when the rest of the world is in much better shape to withstand that, that is a self-destructive decision, which I think Mr. Trump and the Republicans will come to regret, with or without the disruption of our food system, which could be a victim along the way.